Of all the things Disco Elysium is, it's a truly unique and standout game. Being the first release from Zorm Studios, it's intended to be an open-world detective role-playing game. And for most part, it does that well. However, this really isn't your conventional RPG. And people who aren't aware of that are definitely at a greater chance of disliking the game, or just not, understanding it. Things like the lack of a conventional combat system or not creating your player character really sets this game apart. I believe it's for the best though. The game's better off with forgoing these choices in pursuit of its real strengths. I think it's fair to say that on top of the game being strongly story driven, Disco Elysium is also very artistically driven. The game's art design, music, setting, characters and plot work synergistically to present something that's more than just a mere detective RPG. This is best represented through your experience and control of the protagonist, an amnesiac, run-down disco detective, who you'll be able to greatly influence by determining his decisions, abilities, skills, and even thoughts. Through picking your proficiency in your intellectual, psyche, physique, and motoric abilities and skills, you greatly decide how you not only interact with the world, but as well as how you perceive it. I did 2 different playthroughs with essentially opposite builds to see how well the game is designed to accommodate different playstyles. And honestly, it's impressive. Initially, I played a high psyche and physique character. He was able to fight better, tolerate more pain, as well as read and manipulate people quite well. He also had more instinct or intuition, as skills like Inland Empire and Shivers often offered gut feelings or a kind of sixth sense. However, he wasn't actually that great of a detective. He wasn't perceptive or logical, and I feel that harmed his capacity to gather tangible evidence. I still finished the game. There doesn't seem to be any soft lock because of your skill choices, but I definitely ended up without knowing as much as I could have. For my second run, I created a character with high intelligence and motoristics, closer to what I'd consider a realistic detective, with high logic, visual calculus, reaction speed, conceptualization, composure, and perception. I was able to gather so much more evidence. However, my character had much lower health and morale. Drugs, stressful events, or outright harm will lower them, and either going to 0 is a game over. These are raised by the endurance and volition skills respectively. So I'm sure you can see that there's no perfect build, but how each is still unique, making each playthrough satisfying but still ensuring replayability. Now, regardless of your actual abilities, you can level up whatever skill you want, just that there are skill caps that can be later raised on by thoughts or temporarily by drugs. Your skills get used in dialogue through skill checks. Every check consists of a 2d6 roll with a difficulty class. You get a bonus relative to the level of your respective skills, as well as from related information and evidence for that check. So interrogating someone is easier when you have evidence to reinforce your line of questioning, while it can be harder if you've done something to antagonize that person. A check is an instant failure if you roll double 1s, and an instant success if you roll double 6s. There are also white and orange checks. White checks can be attempted repeatedly, becoming available again if you've raised that respective skill or gained some information pertinent to the task at hand. Orange checks can only be attempted once. Often though, you'll have the opportunity to leave and come back later after you've prepared or have more information to make them easier. I feel this system does a decent job at discouraging save scumming, as you'll frequently get the opportunity to try again later with a greater chance anyways. However, there were those times I failed an orange check with a high chance to pass and decided to reload and try again given the odds, and other times where I accepted I just wasn't going to pass that 12% orange check and that it just wasn't meant to be. Skills often result in pop-up thoughts around the world as well. These can be sometimes significant if it's through your perception or shivers, but usually just offers flavor text. And finally, and most significantly, your skills influence how you talk to people in general. Or your skills kind of talk to you themselves. Each one an individual aspect of your mind, each suggest how you should handle a situation and will often clash with each other. The higher level of skill, the more frequent and significant suggestions you'll receive. And it makes for an extremely engaging and entertaining experience. A lot of the time you'll talk to yourself more than actual people, offering a lot of introspection into who you are and who you can become. So the game is as much about figuring out who you are as it is figuring out who's responsible for the murder. Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about the story yet. You awaken in your room in a horrid state with no recollection of who you are or why you're here. As you make your way down the whirling rag, you slowly get a grip of the situation at hand. You're a detective and went on a several-day drug bender. You then meet a Lieutenant Kim Katsuragi, a detective from another precinct who essentially has to babysit you. You're told there's a dead body out back, which has been hanging for about a week, and it's time to investigate. I'll leave the rest of the story talk for later on, but essentially you're free to explore the area of Martinez as you like. While the progression of the plot is linear, the order in which you experience events is really up to you. Certain events can only happen at certain times, meaning there's a minor amount of planning to your days. It's not that much pressure though, as time only moves when you're actively doing something, and one big piece of advice is to frequently hold down tab to highlight everything you can interact with, otherwise you'll miss out on a lot. And while the game is fairly small, and the cast of characters fewer than people probably expected, I think Disco Elysium is hard to rival in terms of the depth of what there is to do. Most characters have great voice acting and unique personalities. You could go to the body straight away, starting your investigation and meeting Kuno.
The rake, Kuno! You should throw the rake at him, Kuno!
The fuck does Kuno know what a rake is? Kuno's not a gardener!
Or you could go towards the Union Strike and meet Mr. Clare.
Now, I'd like to set your mind at ease about one other matter. Your lost gun. Let me assure you, Union people are on it as we speak. I've got my best hounds looking for that lost gun.
Or you could spend a lot of your time exploring the district, talking to random people, and helping with their trivial problems. The game truly shines throughout the various quests and encounters laid out for you. The writing is top notch, whether that's for the main quest, the handful of well-polished optional missions, or meeting the various colourful characters throughout the world. Regardless of where you go, you'll find yourself always along the same track. Just depending on where you spend your time, who you help, and your skills, you'll find yourself reaching different conclusions through varying means. And that's really one of the best things about Disco Elysium. Its storytelling comes across as organic. There's a lot of detective work that actually needs to be done, both through the player's own efforts and your character's skills. Other ways you progress your character are by obtaining new items and forts. Clothing can be bought and found across the game, offering pros and cons. Forts can be attained by talking to certain people, seeing certain events, as well as repeatedly saying or thinking certain ideas. A lot of these forts are colourful and further influence how your detective acts, but also can offer their own benefits and negatives. There's about 50 forts scattered throughout the game. Some are hard to attain and others aren't. Some give significant bonuses such as an ability or skill buffs, while others will have you act differently, making you a bit more nationalist, communist, or maybe a hobo cop. Different characters will then react to you in varying ways, and there's really a lot to learn from certain people. Kim Katsuragi is honestly one of the best companions in a video game. He's a straightforward and serious detective, yet often has times where he'll let some emotions sneak through his cold exterior. His focus is always on the murder investigation, but often finds your random errand running endearing and interesting. He'll go out of his way to help you, and slowly your bond as partners begins to grow. The esprit de corps skill contributes to this a lot. Other characters like Joyce Messier, Titus Hardy, Everard Clare, and Clausia are engaging characters with various convictions. It's really rare in a game that pretty much every character you can interact with is unique and complex, and that's why I really appreciate the developers showing restraint when creating the world. Because the game itself is just small, objectively speaking. When compared to other RPGs, whether that be a Baldur's Gate, Fallout, or any other typical CRPG, the game seems tiny, but honestly every character is much more memorable. Each quest felt like it had a real impact on the people you help, as well as yourself. Everything comes full circle, either into your investigation, or for learning what kind of person you really are. Disco Elysium is very much not like most other RPGs, and it's great for that reason. I'm much more closer to calling it an isometric point-and-click adventure game, because while the game does have roleplay mechanics like branching dialogue and character customization, but it doesn't deliver on that 60-hour-long playthrough across an open world that the promotional material claimed, and honestly, it didn't need to. Maybe I played the game wrong. My 2 playthroughs each took 15 hours, and between the 2, I feel like I solved every quest I came across. Did I unlock every single fort and solve each mission every way possible? Of course not. Doing so isn't necessary to enjoy the game, But if this takes you 60 hours to complete, you're one of those people that considers it imperative to read every single book in the game. You'll see a majority of what's worth seeing in 20 to 30 hours. The only reason I'm going on about this is because the majority of negative reviews regarding this game are accurate in their criticisms. The game isn't the open world with unprecedented freedom of choice, having countless tools for role-playing where you can carve your unique path across the city experience that people expected. All those phrases are from the game's website. They said the game's colossal. It ain't. And while the game does have a revolutionary dialogue system with unforgettable characters, in fact, I think the game has some of the best written characters in a long time, and still, I think the game's amazing. It's beautiful, charming, and engaging. But the rest just feels lacking compared to what people were led to expect. Instead, it's a highly detailed, funky, and made with passion detective adventure game with some roleplay elements. If you understand that fact and want a game where you can investigate a murder while having amnesia in an alternate world that has strong similarities to ours, I think you'd greatly enjoy Disco Elysium, just like I did. If you want a more conventional computer role-playing game, there's a lot of great RPGs out there that aren't $40 US. Also a bit regarding the game's performance. For the most part, the game runs fine. There are some times when it does slow down, and sometimes the pathing to talk to people is a bit poor, and there are some typos, but otherwise, the game is pretty well polished. For an indie studio's first release, it's really better than you could hope. One issue I almost had and others are having is that you can accidentally soft lock your game on the second night. If you don't have 20 real to pay for your hotel room, and it reaches nighttime and you haven't traded in enough recyclables or have enough items to sell at the pawn shop, you can end up not being able to progress the game. So early on, be sure to grab the tear bag, pick up bottles as you progress, and why not ask random people for money. And one final thing which isn't really an issue but I see a lot of people having gripes with, the game absolutely doesn't lead you by the nose in your progress. Sometimes I found myself having to backtrack, clicking on every object and talking to every person because I missed a minor detail necessary to progress a plot. This wasn't an issue personally, it's a detective game after all, but just understand the game is about being slow and methodical, which isn't necessarily fun for everyone. With that being said, we've talked about the basics of the game, why I find it unique and worthwhile. Now, it's time to discuss and explore the story a lot more. Everything in this game happens through dialogue, so it's ultimately necessary to do so. The story, the murder investigation, and your self-discovery is a big payoff to experiencing the game, and I'm pretty sure this game has more words than a lot of visual novels out there. So with that said, spoiler warning. I've already made my thoughts clear on the game, so if you're confident you'll like it, then I suggest experiencing the game for yourself and not having it spoiled. So skip to the time ahead now. If you've already played the game or just don't mind, well, we've got a lot to talk about. The world that Disco Elysium takes place in is completely fictional, but shares strong parallels with ours. Communism, fascism, nationalism and liberalism are concepts still present in the world. The same can be said with the varying ethnicities present in the world as well. There are the Occidentals, which literally means Western, how people from Irania are of course similar to the Dutch, and how the Soulites represent an Asian culture, given Seoul is a Korean surname. Of course, nothing is a one-to-one replica, but it's there to simply install similarities in your head, so you get a better grip of this new world you're in. The game takes place in the Martinique district of Revachol, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, on the face à la mer archipelago, which means facing the sea in French, and how Insulindia is an old term for maritime Southeast Asia. I could go on forever about how many real names, terms, ideas and ideologies are used across the game, but I think this is enough to highlight that although the game is an entirely fictional world, it, in itself, is still very close to ours. 50 years before the game takes place, there was a civil war between the monarchy and communist of Revachol. With the monarchy being overthrown, an international coalition intervened and retook the city. Now it's the year of 52, the 5th of March, and you find yourself in the international zone of Revachol, an area that's loosely run by the foreign coalition with no real leadership. It's an autonomous zone ran by free market values, and the unions in the area are fighting against that. And you've just come up from a 3-day substance binge with a terrible hangover, and there's a dead body hanging outside, and it's the perfect time to solve a murder. So you have the story of the ongoing murder investigation the tension between the local dock workers union standing up against the Wild Pines Company, and your own journey of self-discovery all intertwining. The man that was lynched next to the bar was a mercenary from the Creenal Company, a part of a squad hired by Wild Pines as a security detail during negotiations with the dock workers union. You soon discover that he was killed by a group of union enforcers known as the Hardy Boys, led by Titus Hardy. They, as a group, openly admit they did it because the mercenary had raped a woman staying at the hotel, which turns out to be Clausia, the woman you met at the beginning. However, after talking to her, you discover she was in fact in a relationship with a mercenary who she knew as Leeli. She then informs you that he was shot, and him being hanged was a cover-up. If you're playing a particularly perceptive character, you can realise this early on in the autopsy, which makes the interrogation process much more quicker. It then moves on from who hanged Leeli to who shot him, but after some manipulation and cross-checking, you discover there was an extra member at the lynching, who isn't there now. Meanwhile, going in between the Wild Pines representative Joyce Messier and union boss Everett Clare, you learn more about the Creenal Mercs and union members as you gain the leader's trust respectively. Working for Clare involves 2 menial tasks, which in return he complies with your inquiries, as well as helping find your missing service handgun. Your badge is also missing. Finding that for Joyce can gain her trust. Or you can investigate into someone who's been running drugs in the area, likely one of the lorry drivers. After making your way around Martinez, you piece together that the person smuggling drugs is also the missing member of the Hardy Boys, Ruby. Going back to Clausia and the Hardy Boys, you're able to piece together that she doesn't have an alibi for when Leeli was killed. Now, here's where a lot can be learned or missed, and I feel this can partly come down to the amount of effort you put into exploring the murder scene, as well as having the relevant skills. Having high enough volition can have you realise that Clausia has been lying, and high enough drama can force her to come clean. You learn that she was an agent of industrial espionage and was hiding out here when the murder happened. You can choose to arrest her or not. She's terrified of being turned over to the coalition government, as her work has made her many enemies. Still though, she's adamant Ruby did it. With this as your sole lead, you discover from the Hardy Boys that she went into hiding near the fishing village across the coast. As Wednesday comes by, you're able to cross the river and explore the rundown fishing village and industrial ruins of Martinez, searching for more leads to where Ruby went. You also can find your badge in your car that you drunkenly crashed. Basically, all the destruction you come across in Martinez is your fault. Retrieving your badge from a car, you can confirm your real name is Harriet Dubois, and whether or not you want to embrace it. Also, here is your second job for Claire, getting the signatures from the locals to accept a youth centre being built here, which will force them out due to the construction noise, although you can choose to have the local drunks forge signatures conning Mr. Clare. Either way, doing so will lead you to getting your gun back, which features a pretty peculiar encounter.
Get on the ground! Get on the goddamn ground! Get on the ground! I want you on the pavement right now! This is the pigs!
Now around here, in the third act, is where I feel the writing for the story starts to become a bit jarring, and why I'm confident with insisting the game isn't exactly your typical RPG. You know Ruby is somewhere on the island, but not where exactly. You don't have much time because you know the remaining mercenaries are seeking payback against their union workers. And while there's a few people to interact with and help on the island, there isn't much that leads towards finding Ruby. And if you've played the game and found another way other than this, please let me know, but this seems like the only route. After you discover that Leeli was shot to death and not lynched, you can investigate the ballistics of a shot at the window, with 4 options. The shooter was right outside the window, from 2 positions across the coast, or finally from an island in the middle. You and Kim agree that the shot was most likely point blank outside the room. Given Ruby doesn't have an alibi and has a motive, she's your only true suspect. And despite all of this, the only way you discover her is by staring at a mural and passing a shiver check. If there's any other way, as I said, please let me know. But you essentially just decide, I guess she's in here. Across my 2 playthroughs, I couldn't find any line of investigation where I could prove that's where Ruby was hiding, so you go in there to face her, and she's laid a trap for you. Using compressed radio waves as a trap to keep you at bay, she's willing to prove how she's innocent. You learn that while she has a gun, she doesn't have a rifle chambered in the caliber you found in the mercenary's head, nor was she aware of the secret door that led up to Classia's room, nor the peephole outside the room, and her foot size doesn't fit the prints outside the room either. It becomes evident that both Klassia and the Hardy Boys have essentially sold her out. She also deduces that the shot didn't come from outside the room, otherwise people would have heard it. She refuses to trust you because she believes you're a henchman of La Puta Madre, the head of a dangerous drug cartel. So either you can let her escape or she'll kill herself. Once again, there's no chance of even trying to attempt to apprehend her. Reading her diary, on the day of the lynching she admits she did take part in it, but didn't kill him. Realizing she still committed a crime in the cover-up, she flees as she was scared of you, hearing rumors that you were a human can opener. Realizing she didn't do it either, and that the shot didn't come from outside the room, you head back to the Whirling Rag, where unfortunately the mercenaries have decided to attack. There's the mercenary leader who is acting as the scab worker outside the Union gates, and there's two more, who you could learn are here from Joyce Messier, but get no opportunity to look into, interact with, negotiate, or stop preemptively. Whether you have your gun or not, as well as your logic, rhetoric, reaction, and coordination skills, will determine the outcome of this event. From my experience and from what I've read, it's also impossible to resolve this peacefully and to avoid getting shot. For some reason, in a game where most of the gameplay is to roll dice, this encounter ends with an impossible roll. Sure, there's an impossible roll earlier, but it's just a door that you can't open. I guess that counts as foreshadowing? Yet here, where the efforts of your investigation have reached a boiling point, after the time you spent getting your gun back, building your character so you're proficient in certain checks, and building a strong case from scratch, it's all set in stone. There is genuinely no other option. You can't avoid the second shot, people are guaranteed to die, so it's then more about minimizing casualties. You're then shot in the leg, the only place you couldn't find armor for, and awake the next day, quite injured. The city is in lockdown, the Union is making their moves to claim the city, and you still need to catch the murderer. Only now can you decide to investigate the last potential shooting angle, the island off of the coast. And it really just irks me that there's no apparent way to even consider this a viable option until it's too late. The game refuses to acknowledge what the player may have already realized themselves. It would have been much better for the player to be able to entertain the idea, only to be told by the game that given it's the most unlikely option, they should exhaust the other options first. Up until the end, Disco Elysium is hands down one of the best detective games around, but it's so jarring for your agency to be ripped away from you while the game championed it so much earlier on. Sure, that may be an intended part of a game's message, but it left me feeling dissatisfied. You arrive at the island, which is home to an old war bunker, and find an old deserter from a war 50 years ago still living there. He has the appropriate gun for the murder, the line of sight, and the motive. Is this plausible? Sure. Japanese soldiers from World War II led guerrilla fights up to 29 years after the war ended. And it's foreshadowed. Klassia looking at the island frequently, the Maybell flowers being left outside of her room, a symbol of a revolution, the war surplus rifles being discovered in other bunkers. It's something that was entirely plausible, but it's something you never had the opportunity to figure out, like detectives do. If you don't arrest Klassia, she leaves a clue to the shot having come from the island before disappearing, but I have no idea why there just couldn't be a difficult check to get the information out of her earlier. So ultimately, the reasoning of the two seasoned detectives is, well, there's literally nowhere else to go except for the island. Considering you only discover Ruby because of a gut feeling, it makes even less sense you couldn't discover the old communist soldier with another one, or at least entertain the idea. So, communism killed him, like it killed the monarchy 50 years ago, and like our Ravachol will never be free of its political turmoil. It's a great metaphor, sure, but it's not so great in an interactive medium like a role-playing game. The stakes are gone and your input feels minute. And it reinforces why I consider this more so an adventure game than a role-playing game. None of the choices you made had any bearing on this. I still appreciate the game greatly because there's still the strong story of understanding who Harry is and experiencing the city and people around you, and I get its commentary in a sense, criticizing people and their stubborn political ideologies, which is done throughout the whole game, having the soldier intentionally kill the mercenary to incite conflict between the Union and Criminal Company. He was the one that snuck up to Klaas's room and spied on her. Became infatuated with her, but also wanted to punish her. He's been on the island for 43 years. The war never ended for him, and he never surrendered. The city of Revachol was still home to his enemies, and you learn he even had connections to the Clare brothers. It all makes sense, but it feels like you got there the wrong way. For a game that initially was so strong on your capabilities as a detective, the rest of the game was so well written and nuanced, and then the ending has the feeling like I'm meant to applaud the game for outsmarting me or something. I get it, not every detective game has to end with you catching the bad guy in time and saving the day, and I like that you can use previous evidence that does suggest he's the killer and have it aid to your arrest of him, but for what was already a very niche game, it's definitely a divisive ending. After apprehending the murderer, you sail back to the mainland where you're met by your police colleagues. They reveal that they've been observing you, after you force them away from your investigation in a drunken rage. You then receive a rundown of your actions throughout the game, the good deeds you've done, your relationship with your partner, your interaction with drugs. And it all determines whether or not you're allowed back on the force. You also get to learn about Harry. In both my playthroughs he was a gym teacher. I'm unsure if your actions can influence if you were something else before a detective. I'd hope so, because it'd be a good way to show how your choices really do influence who Harry is. You also learn that he had broken up with his girlfriend 6 years ago, and the loss of her, the stress of the case, and substance abuse is what caused you to completely lose all your memory. You had temporary lapses of memory beforehand, but the stress of this case was the breaking point. But there is a lot more to it than just that. The dreams you have of your ex-partner, the agony it causes Harry, the impossibility with coping with it, that you were a failure and she left you. There's a theory that you're already dead and this is all just the death throes of your mind. Given the subject matter of your dreams, what you can learn about the Pale, which is a antimatter like ocean separating the planet's continents, it's honestly the most interesting and overwhelming part of the game. So aside from the main story ending being a bit unsatisfying, literally everything else is great. I think the stuff for Harry makes sense and is a satisfying conclusion. Ultimately, your actions do determine if he stays a detective or not, but you don't learn much else of your actions. What happened to the mercenaries after the fight, what happens to the city and the Union. And in a part, I'm okay with it, because to me, Disco Elysium is about Harry. I can put up with a lackluster ending to the murder investigation, because I was much more satisfied and interested in learning who Harry was, finding through his struggles and working to see him become a great detective once again, and seeing the world through his eyes. Like I said in the beginning, Disco Elysium is a very unique game, and as a result, it's not for everyone. If you're wanting an expansive open world to explore, and have varying opportunities and outcomes of your experiences, Disco Elysium doesn't really have that. It's linear and dense, and that's not a bad thing. Attention to detail and patience are paramount in this game. There's a lot of downtime when you're figuring out where to go next and breaking down parts of the investigation in real time. It's a lot of fun, and the game shines when you're helping people, exploring the city, and doing detective work. But it's fair to say that not everyone's going to get excited over a slow and methodical detective game, where reading is the bulk of the experience. Disco Elysium is set in a colourful yet gritty world, with complex characters, intriguing plot, and some amazing visuals and music to complement it. If you've liked what you've heard, then I'm confident you'll like playing it. Thanks for watching, and a big thanks to my patrons. See you next time.